Types, literals, and variables in Python. And I'll first note that we're going to look more closely at these different types as we proceed through the course, so I'm going to cover a lot of information here, but you don't need to try to memorize it all right now. Just know that there are different types of data in Python. There can be simple values and what we call compound values. So I'll go through some examples of simple values first. These can be numbers. So an integer is a type, like just the number 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. You can also have real numbers, which are numbers with a decimal point. And you can have complex numbers, which have a real and imaginary part. In Python, there are also character strings, which are strings of text. This is what you'd imagine is just text input. It's not necessarily a numeric type or any other type. So it's just anything that contains characters. We have Boolean values, true and false, which are more or less self-explanatory. We'll see some examples of how they're used in practice. And we have none, which is the type for an empty or unknown value. Now, when we talk about compound values, there are a few different data structures here. In Python, there are lists, which are ordered collections of objects. What I mean by ordered is that if you loop through this list and look at each of the elements within it in turn, the order in which you look at these elements will always be the same every time. And you can choose to add elements to the beginning of the list, to the middle of the list, wherever you want in the list, or to the end of the list. Now there's another compound data structure called a dictionary, which is a key to value mapping. So in this case, the key cat maps to its scientific name, Felis catus. And so a dictionary is taking one value and mapping it to another. In Python, there are also sets, which are similar to lists, but they can only contain unique elements, so that they won't have any repeats of elements. And they're also unordered. So unlike a list where you can insert something at the beginning, middle, or end of a list, you don't have that same flexibility with a set. A tuple is a structure similar to a list, but it's immutable, and that means it can't be changed after it's created. We can't add anything to it or change the value of any of the values contained within a tuple. But otherwise, it's very similar to a list. And then the beauty of Python is we can create complex or custom objects that we design ourselves. And we'll get into this when we talk about classes later on in the course. So with that, let's take a look at how we actually work with these values in Python by creating some variables. And a variable is just a name for some data that we have. And so we're using the assignment operator equals in this case. This is saying take the value on the right side of the equal sign and give it the name on the left side of the equal sign. So we're creating a variable here named x, and we're assigning it the value of 1, which is an integer, a numeric type. We're also creating y, and we're giving it a value that is a string. The string here is a character string. So we can see what the type of these variables is by using the type function. So we're going to print to the screen the value of x is, and then the content in x, and its type is, and then we'll call type of x to see what this is, and we'll do the same with y. So the value of x is 1, and its type is class int. So we'll learn more about classes as I mentioned later on in the course. Don't worry about that for now, but int for integer and str for string in the case of the character string. And you'll note that the quotation marks here are used to denote where the string starts and stops, but when we print it, there are no such quotation marks. And so the quotation marks are not a part of the string itself. Now we also create a variable named z here, and we set its value to true, which is a Boolean type. And we can see that the type of z is class bool, which is our Boolean. All right, so now let's look at what happens if we set x now to hello world. So in a lot of programming languages, since we've set x equals 1, x would be an integer type, and it could only be set to an integer. If we're using a language like C or Fortran, that's the behavior we'd expect. But Python is what's called a dynamically typed language. So even though we've set x equals 1 here, we could then later in the script set x equals hello world, and the type of x would change from class int to class string. And so x became a string. It doesn't have to be an integer for its entire lifetime. It can be whatever type it needs to be. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility, but also a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong in Python. So we'll talk about how we work with these different types more as we work through this course. So I have an exercise here, which is code I'd like you to write and run yourself. And this exercise is in the cell below, create the variables major and graduation year. Then assign your major to major and your graduation year or expected graduation year to graduation underscore year. Then use the print function to produce the output. My major is blank, and I graduated or expect to graduate in blank. So I'm going to go ahead and do this myself here. So my major was mechanical engineering, and I graduated in 2020. So I've created a variable here named major, and I've set the value of it to the character string mechanical engineering, and then I've created graduation year as an integer 2020. So now I'll use the print function to print this out. So my major is comma major, and I graduated in comma graduation year. So if I run this, I can now see the output that I was looking for, and I've printed the values stored within these variables.